about the specific numbers, ultimately precision, but the main thing, right, talking in broad categories, is it takes an enormous amount of fossil fuels to create an electric car. Now, I'm not saying the person who buys an electric car doesn't have a good intention, right? It's like they do, ultimately. They want to contribute to a better environment. I think that's a good thing. Their motives are good, right? But in reality, when you come down to it, the electric cars, in my opinion, the size, the reduction in size, if any, of the carbon footprint. Anybody know what their carbon footprint is, right? In here? So the reduction in the carbon footprint isn't significant enough to say Joey or Susie shouldn't drive that old car that they can barely afford to drive to work, to maybe go to Starbucks, possibly, right? Ultimately, and maybe try to buy some food for them to put on their table later in the day. So my sensibility is, when we think about electric cars, do we cover all these? Well, you can't have an electric car if you have poverty. You can't buy an electric car if you have hunger. You can't buy an electric car if you can't drive it. You can't buy an electric car if you don't know how to drive it, right? Gender equality probably isn't affected by as much on the electric car, but it might be in ways that I don't know. Clean water and sanitation, you probably need water to make these electric cars, right? Affordable and clean energy, well, you know, okay, so it doesn't use as much fossil fuel, but it's the creation of that electric car, right? That, as you guys were talking about, right? The amount of consumption of energy, the strip mining, the labor practices, right? The horrible violations of labor practices, or some places have no labor practices at all, right? Ultimately, including in our own country. We have 10-year-olds working in Iowa in poultry production that are migrants. Okay, is that okay to do? 12-year-olds in very, very dangerous jobs? No. So decent work, right? Maybe making an electric car is decent work. That's a good thing. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure probably helps, although we don't necessarily have enough electric chargers to do that. So that's going to, require us to, again, use energy to build and make these things, manufacture these things, dig up the earth, probably maybe take over areas where people could otherwise live. So it's it's a balance, right? Inequalities, most people can't afford electric cars, right? I mean, they're pretty expensive still, for the most part. Sustainable cities, yeah, they could contribute to sustainable cities. Responsible consumption and production, well, question is, what do we do with those materials when the electric car reaches its end of life, right? They go into a landfill?
Yeah, they go into a landfill and they start leaching toxic chemicals into the earth.
Yeah. So climate action, they maybe help with climate action. Arguably, that's a good thing. Life below water, well, unless they're going to use it to go to the Titanic, probably not, right? Ultimately. Life on land, yes, it does impact our life on land, right? Peace, justice, and strong institutions. Well, if we didn't use as much fossil fuel, right? Maybe we wouldn't have conflict. What are most of our conflicts about in the world? Land. Oil, right? Oil has been a driver of wars and military actions, or a reason for people to try to justify it for eons, right? So maybe an electric car helps with this, and partnership for the goal. So you see how I'm taking an example of an electric car where it has positives and negatives, but also because of our connectome, we will form an opinion automatically. Oh, well, their electric car, they must really care about the environment. But they may not. For all you know, they have like a big, huge tank they drive on the weekends in the sand dunes, right? So all I'm saying is that at the end of the day, right?
They don't work for the gas prices.
Exactly, right? So for the most part, at the end of the day, any one individual item, right, can be viewed. We lost that for a second. Any individual item in our life on a small level, right? So can be viewed in this regard. Including, I know you got a pen yesterday, right? Which is cool. Yeah, it's very neat, right? And so anything we buy, anything we use, any material we get involved in, this is why I like being a materials engineer, right? Because everything we do in life requires materials, whether it's Morgan storage, whether it's Cameron's computers, whether it's your circuit boards or your robot, right? As an example, Bucky's book. right? At the end of the day, it's all materials of some sort at the end of the day. So when you're going through life, I mean, I know we don't have a lot of time to think about our lives. That's why I was talking about taking that pause and thinking about what we do, how we can make the world better. Think about, commit these to memory, and I bet all of you have the ability. If I gave you a test, I gave you 5 minutes to look at this, you probably could regurgitate on a piece of paper all these 17 goals. I have no doubt. What I want you to do is not regurgitate them like the states in the United States or the states' capitals. How many had to do states' capitals in here, like when you're in elementary school or something, right? Like all of us, right? Or the states. Name the states, guys, and you had to memorize the states. Well, who cares? Because if you don't know what each state had, that's good. Every state has good and bad, right? Has good things and bad things. I don't particularly like Iowa's personal policies about people, right? But they do feed us. So we can't just condemn Iowa completely, right? There are some good things that farmers do, even though the political policies and the social policies are not things that I personally agree with, right? So whenever we're thinking about forming an opinion, what I like to think about is our connectome that we discussed a little bit about, right? And the 17 SDGs. Okay, Cameron, you could go ahead and finish that.
Can't happen in just one way. The SDGs cover sustainability